Hey, welcome back to the Big Book Deep Dive here on Progress and Perfection. You can find more information on our website. You can contact us. All the links for that will be in the description below. My name is Eamon. I'm joined by my good friend John. Here we go. Maybe they made some like that, but I had a pair just like that. I mean, it looked just like that.
You had Birkenstocks?
That was a pair of Birkenstocks. I coveted Birkenstocks for years, and finally I got a pair.
Where are they now?
Oh, now that's a great question. The only thing, and there is one thing that survived high school and is still in my possession.
Besides you.
And besides me. Actually, I'll think of two things that are still in this house. One of them is my Gerber multi-tool, my little fishing multi-tool.
Wow.
And that thing, one piece broke off of it.
Yep.
I've used that for over 22
That's amazing.
years,
That's incredible. That's incredible.
And the other is my CD case.
Oh, my God. CDs.
I've still got my high school CD case.
Does it have the CDs in them?
It does.
Let's freaking go. Where is it? I want to see what the CDs are.
Only recently has it come out of my car. In fact, Angela berated me because I kept it under my seat in my current car for so long because I still have a CD player in my car.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you listen to them
in
your car?
Every now and then. Absolutely.
Were they scratched?
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
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 I've got some burn CDs, some real CDs.
Oh, yeah. The burn CDs. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
You buy like a whole pack of blank CDs.
Yeah.
Make burgers.
Get this. I got one of the staff at Copac to burn me 9 Inch Nails, the Fragile double disc.
Oh, that's awesome.
While I was in treatment.
That's awesome.
And I guess we weren't allowed to have music or something for a minute.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been Bill.
No, it was a chick.
Huh.
One of the nurses.
Huh.
Yeah, it was good stuff. And I may still have that actual burned Fragile disc.
Fragile. Unbelievable. What's wrong?
Oh.
What's wrong with you?
Many things. Many things.
Well, that's incredible.
Speaking of what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
We're on step 4.
I know. Where are we on step 4? Are we bottom of 63 or
top of 64?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I couldn't remember where
top
we were.
Of 64, I think.
Yeah. I read last time, so I'm going to let you read this time.
Yeah, I got it.
And I'm going to see how you navigate the chart.
Yeah.
See how you read that.
It'll be a quick navigation straight to the next paragraph.
Yeah, I think that ought to be pretty good. That'll be pretty good. Do you have any thoughts on step 4?
I do have thoughts on step 4.
Give us some thoughts on step 4.
So
tell us about step 4.
It's a lot worse.
It's worse
before taking step 4 than after. This is a case of the anticipation being way worse than the participation. Inevitably, people stop here and balk here and put it off and don't want to do it and make it, I think, a bigger deal than it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is a big deal, and you talked about it a little bit last week, it's also, it just becomes a working part of your mind, a working part of how we live if we just walk through it the first time.
Yeah. Get
this inventory taking process to be a part of our regular recovery routine.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did the same thing. I mean, I put off doing this when it was assigned to me.
Yeah.
And unlike some of the guys I work with today, I had jack crap going on.
Yeah.
I had zero excuse to, 19, 20 years old, the calendar was empty.
Yep.
Like I could have done it in a day if I'd wanted to. But I put it off. I had a good sponsor at the time. It was kind of the old school sponsorship, zone that we were going through. We would read this just like you and I are doing.
Mm-hmm.
We got here and he gave me some worksheets to do, which they were a dated version of what I still use. I kind of use an updated version of those original sheets. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But yeah, I put it off and he finally said, hey, we're supposed to do your 5th step like Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you get off your ass and write your 4th step down so we can do that?
Yeah.
And, I'd be interested your take on like the process of writing everything down, the thoroughness, but
sure,
it was just not a huge deal for me.
Yeah.
And that may be like discouraging. I don't want it to be heard that way. If some folks are stuck in the middle of this and it is like very long and you are writing a lot, that's great. I was as thorough as I could be. I was young, so I had that on my side. Just the wealth of damage was not as long as 20 years worth of it to actually inventory. But yeah, just do it. Like that's my biggest thought is
what
get it done.
I mean, I think you went through this at Copac too, but they ask you to do a fourth step in Copac, and I think a lot of treatment centers have that as part of their recovery regimen, like do your fourth step. How much value do you put on the fourth step that's done in treatment?
Minimal sometimes, but also here's the thing that I was told when I was coming out of Copac, I almost said Cornerstone, when I was coming out of there and was actively being sponsored at the same time. David, who was my sponsor, said, hey, your assignment from me right now is to do everything that they tell you to do. Coin out, get out, and then we'll hit the ground running.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was some overlap. I did whatever they told me to do and kind of check those boxes.
Yeah.
But we definitely went back through by the book. And I honestly, I don't even think I did like a written fourth step during my tenure at Copac. I know I did at Cornerstone.
Yeah.
And I know it was very half-hearted. And we even did like a sort of confessional fifth step with a guy. And I don't even remember like saying anything. So, and I've heard it runs the gamut, the experience of others that I've talked to, treatment fourth steps and treatment fifth steps.
Yeah.
The valuable part, if nothing else, is following directions though.
Right.
Like that's something we're not good at doing.
Right.
Especially in the beginning.
For sure.
So there's something to be said for even if you throw it away and you redo it, just follow, practice following directions.
Yeah.
Because we suck at that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, it's like, it's not worthless. And I think you're right. It's the demonstration and your ability to be humble and follow directions, follow lead of other people. And also like, I think maybe from my experience and then just other people, it's also just a good primer. It sort of gets people into the practice of what to expect once we get down to maybe doing it with a sponsor. So like I agree with you, like all is not lost. The work you do in treatment with step 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the steps are that the treatment place may have you work through, I think are very beneficial.
Yep.
But I see them almost as primers for the real opportunity, to a certain, let's be honest, to a certain extent, you're doing it in treatment so you can get out.
For sure.
I want to get this stuff done so I can ensure that I'm getting out as quickly as I can. But once you get out into the real world and the rubber meets the road, and it's just like your sponsor sitting across from you being like, all right, let's get this fourth step done. Do we have the motivation to do it? And so I think it can get you kind of in the practice of being ready to really dive in and take a look at it.
Yeah, because I remember how vastly my sincerity and willingness would fluctuate in treatment and thereafter too. But it was just like super steep peaks and valleys of, I am on fire for staying sober. This is it. I'm in it for life. Here we go. And then you wake up the next day and it's like, complete opposite.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is make my freaking bed.
Exactly.
Get off my back. And in fact, I'm just going to lay here in bed, even though it's way past time for me to get out of bed. So no, I can remember that.
Oh,
freaking Bungalow Row, baby.
Bungalow Row. Motel Row, too.
Oh, yeah, Motel Row,
Motel Row back there on the back.
I was on Motel Row, too. Ugh.
I never made it to that big bungalow.
You didn't? The big house?
No, I started over in whatever, if you're facing the highway, if you're facing Motel Row, on the left, there was like two, maybe they were bungalows too.
Yeah.
Bungalows. Started in one of those.
Yeah, those are bungalows. Then they had the bungalows here and they had Motel Row. Yeah. And then the big house was over there. Yeah.
Big house. I forgot that's what it was called.
Well, yeah, there was the big house and there may have been another bigger house, but there was the big house that was over there. It was like for graduates.
Yeah, I think so.
Who were still sort of in the IOP version of
hanging around.
Yeah, I can remember staying over there at the, oh man, I can't remember that dude. One of those dudes made some magical fried chicken. in that place.
We did have some good eating out there from time to time.
Like a champ.
Yeah. Yeah.
I ate like a king.
And we got to go buy our own groceries at that little grocery store, the Piggly Wiggly or something.
Dude, so I had the great occasion twice during my stay there of having executive chefs be my roommates. Yep. So yeah, we would eat like just freaking royalty. It was amazing.
I remember a dude, Steve something was my roommate at one point. And same thing. If he wasn't a professional, he was like, might as well have been.
Oh, yeah.
Like, dude, can you stay here?
Let's go.
This is
Who's
awesome.
got cooking duties this week? Me for every meal.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Sounds great.
And they love doing it.
And they love doing it. And it's delicious. It was beautiful.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, I totally remember that. Okay, so read for us.
All right. Step 4. We're on page 64. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsellable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did the exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. And then it's going to go through them. Resentment being number 1. Resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we've been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with? We were usually as definite as this example. And it goes through a chart of 3 columns. Column 1 being I'm resentful at, and it's got a Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer. It's got column 2, the cause, and why this guy's resentful at these 3 people. And then column 3 affects what part of him that it affects. Sex relations, self-esteem, fear, self-esteem, security, pride. And that's kind of the basic format, the real simple format that the book talks about.
Yep.
I'm going to pause here and I want to ask you about how this holds up still today. Resentment, number 1 offender. Is this still a no-brainer that it's kind of touted as all form of spiritual disease flows from this?
So I think it's the more tangible one. It's a little bit easier to identify.
Yeah, easier to point at.
And it's easier to point at. I think it's easier to deal with. But I think like shame is probably the real, I don't know what you would say, sickness. Down there at the very bottom, the real root, I think, has a lot to do with shame. I think it's a worthy exercise, though, because you can't just dive in straight into shame with people for the most part. You've got to work your way there. Yeah. And so in that regards, I think, resentment is a good step. Fear is a good step. Like we'll go through the typical columns that are on a 4th step. I think those are worthy endeavors to deal with, to pull out, so that you can then address maybe what's down there lurking at the very bottom, which is that idea of shame, just feeling bad about who I am, and why do I feel bad about who I am? These things. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense to me. But I would say it's maybe not at the very bottom of the list, but certainly a way to make the bottom accessible.
Yeah. That tracks.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to continue at the bottom of 65. We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its peoples were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us to drink is to die.
So that's interesting. So I feel like what it's saying is that yes, there are situations within the world and people that are wrong.
Big time.
And people get things wrong. But it's more how we react to that, to them being wrong, that is the problem.
Yeah.
That creates the resentment.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that they are wrong, but it's more how we react to that.
Yeah. Yeah, the resentment being that thing that we harbor, that we hold on to, that we just mull on it. It starts to feel good because I'm looking at how wrong you have done this thing.
And how right
I am. Or I would have done it, or it should have been done, or whatever scenario I think would justify what should happen.
Right.
And it becomes, I think the blocking off from the sunlight of the Spirit is a real good analogy or picture to look at, because it really does, when I'm harboring resentment, even when I'm flirting with that these days, and when anger crops in and starts to just sit down with me for a little while, it really does make me sour. It really does block off what I've come to rely on, which is a channel to this sunlight of the Spirit, as they put it. And that's why it's like we got death threats in that paragraph we just read.
Right.
Like when we stay in that place, and I've seen a lot of bitter people, as I know you have in sobriety, that they just stay in this bitterness. And they freaking drink again, usually.
Right.
Like if you don't get rid of that or past that, it can take you out. It can take you back.
Right. Yeah. And I think like it's worth saying, because I run into this a lot of times. There are people that do us wrong that we should be mad at.
Yeah.
So like there are plenty of situations of abuse that occur to people where they are absolutely in the wrong. And it doesn't necessarily follow the script of the big book to necessarily figure out what role did I play in creating this resentment. And so like just sort of a quick little interjection there, addendum. I think there are situations where we don't need to figure out like what was wrong with me that caused this person to treat me this way. Sometimes people are just assholes and they're abusers, and like that's a real thing, and that can be worked through in a separate way outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. So just as a caveat.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because I've run into that working with people, and it's really one of the points where sponsorship or a non-professional is not really equipped all the time to walk through something like that, because you end up like the whole point of like looking at a 4-step, the bulk of what we're doing is looking for the causes and conditions we can control. But when we don't actually have a part in something, what do you usually recommend? Is that where like professional counseling, trauma counseling really does come into play as a needed tool?
For sure. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. It's like it's an addition. It's an addendum. It's a both and type of thing. It's not necessarily an either or. And I think we'll touch on this when we get to the whole 5th step process too. But I think there's a place to have wisdom and discernment in the disclosure of some of that stuff. Simply because as much as we, it's an anonymous organization, and we do the best we can to keep sort of people's stories, their stories, and not to share. For better or worse, the sponsor-sponsee relationship isn't bound by a code of ethics that requires it to stay secret. And I've run into that before too. I've had people come to my office where it's literally they're working through steps with a sponsor, and they've got this 1 or 2 things that they just don't want to tell their sponsor. Yeah. And it's not because they don't have a good relationship with them. It's just like there may be a shame or stigma attached to it, to where they really want to ensure that it doesn't get out. Yep. But at the same time, they see the necessity in having that sort of 5th step cathartic moment of sort of speaking it and letting it go.
And oftentimes those are probably the things that are the most cathartic. And so finding a way, some channel, it's not about one person has to hear everything. It's about it needs to not be just kept secret.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Cool. And people out there, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying don't tell your sponsor stuff. Right. Just use wisdom and discernment. I mean, God willing, you get the type of relationship with your sponsor that you need to have to where you do feel as though they can hold those secrets. Yep. But sometimes they we're people, and if we're not sort of trained professionals, even to hold this dark, deep, sort of traumatic stuff, you can run the risk of having vicarious trauma as just the listener, because there's some things you can't unhear. And it's like, oh my God, I just wanted to help you not drink. And now I know this, oh geez, So I think there is a certain amount of wisdom and discernment to be had in that.
Awesome. Continuing on here. If we were to drink, or if we were to live, is that where I am?
Yep.
If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us.
The grouch.
They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for the alcoholics, these things are poison. Another death threat. We turned back to the list, for it held the key to our future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done.
Did that one ever resonate with you?
Big time.
Yeah.
And I go back to this often because this is another simple, short, concise, and very powerful frame of reference. It completely upends. It's kind of like the 3rd step prayer. It takes me out of the picture and put God at the center. This does the same thing. It takes my little feelings, and don't hear that wrong, like see our trauma conversation a second ago. But for most instances, this takes my feelings out of it. It zooms me out, puts me up here from a proper perspective, and it invites God in there into my heart to soften it so that I can view, usually rightly, the other person or situation differently, if not rightly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I love this line. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. Yeah. I love pointing that out to people. Mm-hmm. It's like, bro, they own you right now.
Yeah.
Like, they're in your head.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, we don't even realize how much other people own us and are dictating to us the terms of how we feel and how we act and how we react. And just even that idea can a lot of times be enough for people to go, I don't want
screw that.
Yeah. They don't own me.
Yeah,
they don't dictate to me my terms of how I live. And it's like, that's right. So let's get them out of your head. So anyways, I just love that line.
Yeah, that's good. We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. And so I do think it's interesting here how they continue to flip the script. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, I'm angry at this person, and you're telling me this is the complete wrong perspective, because what I should actually be looking at is how I can be helpful. Right. Trying to set this posture of service up, which will come, later down the road in the rest of the steps of how we actually fit ourselves to be of maximum service. Mm-hmm. So it's just another one of those things we've got to completely change and invite God to change how our perspective is. Mm-hmm. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight.
All right, so how hard is that for people to do?
It's usually pretty difficult. And, this is the fourth column. We read that little chart on the other page. That was kind of the three columns. And this is what you traditionally see as column 4. Mm-hmm. All right, where's my fault in it? Where's my part? Yeah. I add the word inconsiderate. I don't know if it's in my printouts or not. Oftentimes that can become a gateway for me to show people, if nothing else, are we being inconsiderate of what? Right here at the top we just said, of perhaps this person's spiritually sick too. Maybe they're doing the best they can. Yeah. It may be really crappy, but maybe that's honestly all they got. Right. Maybe it is a narcissistic, just lost person. I find that a little bit of explanation usually goes a long way at the start for this. Once they kind of see this, it usually clicks with most of the rest of the list. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I did have a part there.
I'm kind of around that same way. Like initially it seems like people pretty much balk at it. Mm-hmm. Like let's figure out like what role did you play in creating this resentment? Let's see if we can take an angle to see if there is a part that you played in it. And most of the time people are like, no, I didn't do anything. Yeah. But I think you're right. A little bit of explanation. And I think I love your word there, inconsiderate. The verbiage too can help, because it's not like, let's see where you were a dick. Mm-hmm. It's like, nah, maybe there was a little bit of inconsiderate simply because you didn't know the situation. You didn't recognize the situation. So I think, that can make it a little more palatable. I dig it.
And this is kind of fifth step stuff, but I remember that one thing that my sponsor pointed out to me when we did ours for my own fourth column is he framed it, and I've never really been able to say it great since then, but he framed it in a way where he posed the question to me, and I forget on what specific resentment, but hey, do you think that maybe just literally the act of holding on to this resentment, which you acknowledge is not healthy, like maybe that's your part in it? Like at this point, the damage is done. Like it's not an active scenario. There's not an active shooter. It's just, it's in the past, but you're still holding it, milking it for something. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that That's been helpful for me in my own inventories ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I dig it. Yeah. Cause there is a certain amount of selfishness that you describing that. I mean, it does match that idea of holding on to it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It allows you to continue to be the victim, which gives you
that's what it is.
Excuses to hold on to it or act a certain way or continue to be butthurt.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's that victim card, man.
Right.
Victims have a lot of trouble getting sober too.
Yeah, they do.
Hard to stay sober as a victim.
Yep.
All right, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. That's from the chart on the previous page. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil, corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there's a better way. We think so. For we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear.
Sort of a reframing of the third step.
Absolutely. We're bringing this. We're bringing God back front and center into this section, especially.
Yeah. Why do you think in this section specifically, like as a response to fear?
It's less tangible. Fear is. To your point about resentments being kind of the gateway, easy to put our finger on it. You know, it's usually got a person or an actual situation attached to it. Where fear is this, I identify with it almost as this just uneasiness within me that does kind of stretch into and touch a lot of different aspects, if not all, of my pre-sober life. And so, you often hear the expression of the other side of fear is faith, and those two are the two polar extremes. And I think that's because we have choices to really live in this darkness, and there are pre-sober, our unsober mindedness, or we have the choice to really take the third step for what it is, and then begin walking like we're doing in the fourth step, in action into His light and His will. And honestly, we can do that kind of afraid too, because courage is not that fear is gone. It's that we're acting in spite of this. So we have new fears that we're walking through, rather than just kind of sitting in and I'm just picturing just a sitting back, just dwelling in this quagmire of not being able to really get out, before we enter into the sober world and are offered a solution. It
reminds me, like you're touching on something. It reminds me, like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about it, just like how God creates order out of chaos. Mm-hmm. But chaos came first, almost as a prerequisite for the order to arrive. But it just kind of parrots that idea, and fear. I think most fear. I mean, this is a little kind of out there, but I think most fear in its core is existential fear, and it creates this like death anxiety. This, the fear may be of spiders, but why am I afraid of a spider? Because it's going to bite me and kill me.
Yep.
Like it's somewhere, if you follow the rabbit trail of fear, it ends in death.
Yeah.
And so I think like obviously the remedy to that fear of death is God, especially like as we know God is a Christian God who like overcomes death and declares us like immortal beings, even in the present sense, that we don't have to fear death. Mm-hmm. And so I also think like, I don't know that was the intention, but I think it's kind of a creative way of addressing that as a remedy as well of sort of like a soft sell, interjecting God into the fear equation, as that sort of eternal remedy to the death problem.
Absolutely. And interesting too, that in, this is the fourth step instructions. We've got this chart for resentments, but really we just got this short discussion of fear. Mm-hmm. And then, well, what do? We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And once we commence to outgrow it. And so it's this turning to him for the strength, but it's not saying we're cured of it. Mm-hmm. No, we begin the process basically. Mm-hmm. And also, and I'll link in the notes, kind of the fourth step sheets. We've got sheets for fear that are basically in the same format. Right. So I think it's helpful to get them down in black and white on paper in the same way, even though it doesn't really detail that exactly in the same way here in the book.
Yeah.
Did you do that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Same type of format.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the resentment worksheet and the fear worksheet, and then the like marketing word sex. We'll probably get to that next time. But the sex is a big part of it. What was the other one? There's resentments, fears, sex.
Sexual misconduct, and then harms done to others. Which sometimes that's kind of the wild card sheet. Yes, like I don't even think I had that officially the first time.
Yeah. Like harms outside of sex.
Yeah.
Something like that. Which, I mean, look, if you beat people up a lot, then you know what I'm saying? It's
kind of that catch-all.
Sure.
You done anything else that didn't make it to the list?
I mean, I can remember I sold some dude a bag of like weed that was full of rocks one time. I like put rocks into the buds and sold it. I was like, oh, that's legit.
You a bad man.
Sorry if you're out there. I have no idea who you were, but you got a pack with maybe a bud and a bunch of rocks in it. So hope you like that one. I don't know.
That's incredible.
I don't know if that classifies as a harm to others. Maybe it's one. Maybe I need to do a new fourth step and put that on there.
Hey, when in doubt, write it out. That was was the instruction.
Cut out I cut my cocaine and made it less powerful. Is that a harm done to others? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I need to go back and revisit all this stuff again.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Bunk acid. Oh, sure. That's acid. Sure. Oh, it's a piece of cardboard paper. But you think it's acid. You pay me $20 right on. Sorry if that was you out there. Sorry. My bad. Call me. I'll make it right. I'll make amends.
We're going to need you to bring an amended fourth step next week.
I think you're right.
We need to just get all these out on the table.
Right. And what we'll have to do is actually, once we get to that point, we'll have to debate whether or not these are ones I need to make in purpose.
Oh, absolutely.
Amends I need to make in purpose. Or if I'm just willing, if that's good enough. So, that's good. Always a pleasure, friend.
A pleasure, sir. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find more info at progressandperfection.com, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.